Hello and welcome back to the channel. First day of our visit to Italy, in which we will make a visit to the most famous monuments of Rome. Prepare to know the so-called Eternal City, and as always, if you like our videos, do not forget to give a like, subscribe and activate notifications so that you know when we upload a new video. Rome, the capital of the province of Lazio in Italy, has about 3 million inhabitants. But what stands out most in it are its 3 millennia-old, represented in countless monuments. As we stay outside of Rome, specifically to the north, the best option is to leave the vehicle in AP+R parking, like that of the station of Saxa Rubra, where we will have both buses and trains. Can leave the car parked for 16 hours for only €2.50, and for a 1.50 you can travel by train. Until the start of the visit, which we started to the north in the Piazza del Popolo. We access the Piazza del Popolo by the so-called Porta del Popolo, a monumental gate from the 16th century, with marble columns, statues of several saints and a shield of papal weapons. In the center of the great Piazza del Popolo, you will find the oldest obelisk in Rome, and it could be said to constitute the north gate of the city. In it we will find 3 churches, the parish church of Santa Maria del Popolo, built in the 11th century, and 2 churches that we could call twins. These are Santa Maria de Miracoli, built in the year 1678, and Santa Maria de Montesanto, built 3 years earlier. Also, at each side of the square we have 2 beautiful fountains, as well as a central fountain where the obelisk is located. To see it better we take a little height, and from the fountain of the goddess of Rome, we climb up to the so-called terrace of the Pincio, located at one of the ends of Villa Borghese, which we will go on a next visit. We continue our journey along the so-called Via del Corso, a large street full of shops, and that arises between the 2 churches of the Piazza del Popolo to the Venice Square that we will later visit. But before we get there, following the directions, we get to one of the emblematic places of Rome. We are talking about the famous Piazza di Spagna, which is very crowded with tourists in early July. In it we find a beautiful fountain, the so-called Fontana della Barcaccia, of 17th century Baroque style and work of the architect and sculptor Pietro Bernini, and of which it is said to be inspired by the arrival to the square of a boat in the flood of the Tiber River in 1598. But above all, this square is famous for its staircase, the so-called Scalinata di Trinità dei Monti, built in the 18th century, connecting its 135 steps, the Spanish Embassy and the Trinità de' Monti Church, and never miss in the photographic memories of any tourist. Behind the so-called Salustian obelisk, presiding over the square from above, we find the beautiful church of Trinità dei Monti, a 16th century Renaissance-style church. From the Piazza di Spagna we move to another of the emblematic places of Rome and as visited as maybe the Colosseum or the Vatican. As we get closer to this monument, the street is increasingly crowded with people, giving evidence of the large number of visitors it has. It is estimated that it is visited by about 450,000 tourists per month, or what would be the same about 1,200 visitors per hour. It is the famous Trevi Fountain, entirely attested by tourists trying to take a photograph or throw a coin, from which between 3,000 and 4,000 euros are collected daily. We are in front of a magnificent fountain, in Rococo style, with almost 50 meters of front, and built between 1732 and 1762, originally by the architect Nicola Solvi, being the stage of films as famous as the La Dolce Vita. From this attested place, after throwing the corresponding coin, and after admiring the magnificent columns of the Temple of Hadrian, today the seat of the Rome Stock Exchange, we arrived at another place, masterpiece of Roman engineering. The so-called Pantheon of Agrippa, or Pantheon of Rome, is an ancient Roman temple today consecrated as a Catholic church, and that unfortunately we could not visit due to the kilometer-long queue of tourists. Built between the years 118 and 125, what draws the most attention is its enormous dome, with a diameter and a height of 44 meters, which makes it the largest mass concrete dome in history, and a prowess for its time, being slightly larger than the dome of the Basilica of St. Peter. In this place we also take advantage to rest and eat one of the juicy snacks, which at a very good price you can find both here and in many other places in Rome. After recovering, we visit an impressive place, which is no other than the imposing monument to Victor Emmanuel II, also known as the Altar of the Fatherland or the Vittoriano. This imposing monument located on Venice Square was built in honor of the first king of the unified Italy, Victor Emmanuel II, being built in white marble and opened in 1911. In it we find, apart from fountains and the statue of Victor Emmanuel II, the tomb of the unknown soldier, with an eternal flame and containing the remains of a soldier killed during the First World War, of whom his identity is unknowable. The colossal monument to Victor Emmanuel II is 135 meters wide and 70 meters high, and is composed of dozens of majestic Corinthian columns and endless stairs, which, as we said, are made in white marble. An equestrian statue of Victor Emmanuel made in bronze presides over the whole ensemble, and behind it two squares guided by the goddess Victoria crown a huge portico of 16 columns. Inside we find the so-called Risorgimento Museum, a museum dedicated to the unification of Italy, where weapons, flags and other objects related to this historic moment are exhibited. From this monument, you have impressive views, both of the forums, as well as of the Palatine and the Colosseum. Although if you want to have a better view, through an elevator you have access to a panoramic terrace located in the highest part of the monument, provided that you are willing to pay the €7 that costs to climb to this panorama terrace. After visiting this impressive monument, along the path of the Imperial Forums, we arrive at what is undoubtedly the most famous monument of Rome and one of the most renowned in the world. It is the Roman Colosseum, also called the Amphitheatre of Flavius, and built in the 1st century, was the largest of all that were built during the Roman Empire. As a tip to avoid the long queues of the entrance, it is best to always buy an entrance with preferred access and thus avoid the high summer temperatures. Once we have access to this impressive monument, which in ancient times had a capacity for about 65,000 people distributed in 80 rows of grades, you will undoubtedly begin to imagine the gladiator struggles and the public shows that were organized here. To begin, its inauguration lasted 100 days, participating in it all the Roman people, and dying in its celebration dozens of gladiators and fairi who were sacrificed for the pleasure and spectacle of the people. The Colosseum was used for 5 centuries, the last games being held in the 6th century. The playing field itself was an enormous oval of 75 by 44 meters and was actually a platform built of wood and covered with sand. The basement was a huge complex of tunnels and basements, in which gladiators, convicts and animals were housed. Access to these tunnels is possible, provided you are willing to pay a little more for the entrance. The distribution of the spectators was made according to their social class. On the 1st floor, on the podium, were seated the most eminent Romans, as senators, magistrates, priests and vestals. At the next level were the aristocrats who did not claim to be senators. The next level was divided into 2, one for the rich citizens and another for the poor. And the highest level, built of wood and possibly without seats, was reserved for poor women. As a curiosity, the 1st floor, the podium, where they sat, as we have said, the most illustrious Romans, since it was the floor closest to the beasts, was endowed with a metal net of protection and arches set at regular intervals. Access from the extended corridors was made through the so-called vomiters, so called because they allowed an enormous amount of people to leave in a short time. And they were also well designed, that 50,000 spectators could be evacuated in just over 30 minutes, which gives us an idea of the ingenuity and intelligence of the Roman engineers. If you look outside, you will have an impressive view of both the Palatine and the Forum, as well as the Arch of Constantine. If you visit Rome, you must visit the Colosseum, where spectacles such as Trajan's celebration of his victories in Dacia in the year 107 were held, and in which for 123 days 11,000 animals and 10,000 gladiators participated. We left this stunning place to head very close to the Roman Forum and the Palatine. But first we admire the precious Arch of Constantine, built together at Colosseum, a huge commemorative arch with a height of 21 meters, erected in the year 315. Now we have access to the Palatine and the Roman Forum through the so-called Via Sacra, which ends in the Arch of Titus and which served as inspiration for the Arc de Triomphe of Paris. In the Arch of Titus, we turn left towards the Palatine, a mountain about 50 meters high, and that is the most central of the 7 hills of Rome. First, we find a balcony, where we will see 2 churches, the Church of San Bonaventura and the Church of San Sebastiano, as well as the remains of a temple built by the Emperor Heliogaballo. A pleasant walk takes us to the Temple of Domitiano, which consisted of 3 parts, the Domus Flavia, which was the public area, the Augustan Domus, that was the private area, and the Domitian Stadium or Palatine Stadium, in whose interior there was a ring-shaped avenue, from which roads and parterres came out, with many decorations in different types of marble. As for the Augustan Domus, it was ordered to be built by the Emperor Domitian in the 90s AC, as an extension of the Domus Flavia. Next to it we find the Domus Flavia, which constitutes the public area of the Domitian Palace, in which stands the pond of the Garden of the Peristyle, in the shape of the lake, and in whose center there was a unique octagonal island, with a maze pattern of canals and fountains, all carved in precious marble. After crossing the gardens of El Orti Farnesiani, we arrive at the Terrace Belvedere, where we will enjoy an impressive view of the Roman Forum. We leave the Palatine Hill and descend towards the Roman Forum. And in the descent, we admire the beautiful fountain of the Fontanone Theatre. And we have already entered the Roman Forum. It is an extensive area of Roman temples, squares and government buildings, some 2,000 years old. And the Romans referred to it as Forum Romanum, or simply as Forum. It was like the central square of any present-day city, and where government, market, and religious institutions were located. and as today, it was where trade, business, prostitution, religion, and the administration of justice took place. We will find countless monuments such as the Basilica of Cosme and Damian, from the 6th century, or the House of the Vestals, located next to the Temple of Vesta, where the Vestals, the priestesses, costured the sacred fire, symbol of the eternal city. The House of the Vestals was the place of residence of the priestesses, and there were 6 Vestals guarding the fire of Rome. Being elected when they were between 6 and 10 years old, and making a vow of chastity, and being considered sacred in ancient Rome. In front, we have the Temple of Antonino and Faustina, very well preserved. And that was a gift of Emperor Antonino to his wife Faustine. You can also see the Basilica of Santa Maria Antiqua, which is the oldest Christian temple in the Forum, and next to it the Oratory of the 40 Martyrs, dedicated to 40 Christian soldiers, condemned to die in the frozen waters of a lake in Armenia during the persecution of Diocletiano. Nearly intact is also the Curia Aelia, a senate that was built in 44 BC and later converted into a basilica. We continue through the paved streets, a magnificent work of the Roman engineers, to the Settimio Severo Arch, which tells of the emperor's victories in northeastern Iran, or the Colonna di Foca, a commemorative column 14 meters high. At the end of the Forum we find 2 monuments, the Temple of Saturn, one of the oldest Roman temples built in the year 498 BC and in whose interior was kept the treasure of the state, and the Temple of Vespasian and Titus, dedicated to the imperial worship of Emperor Vespasian, deified by the Senate shortly after his death. After the visit to this impressive place, back to the train station, we stopped in another unique place of Rome. It is the Piazza Navona, and it has been an important site since ancient Rome, where a stadium was already erected for sports competitions and gladiator fights. It is surrounded by buildings of great artistic value, such as the Pamphili Palace, which currently houses the Brazilian embassy, or the Church of St. Agnes in Agone, built where the stairs of the stage were located, and where St. Agnes was forced to get naked in public and renounce her Christian faith, being miraculously covered by her hair that grew to her suddenly. Here we also find 3 beautiful fountains, the Fountain of the Moro and the Neptune Fountain at both ends, and the Baroque fountain in the 4 rivers, located in the center, and representing the 4 great rivers of the world known at the time, the Nile, the Ganges, the Danube and the Silver River, and crowned by the 18-meter-high Domitian obelisk, which this emperor commanded to build here. And in Piazza Navona we end our visit, but we will return to Rome, as there is a lot to see.